All right, we're back. So let's pick up where we left off. We learned what the app delegate is. We stripped out the storyboard, the view controller, and we learned that app delegate has a variable that is called window. It is of type UIWindow. And we're going to expand on this. We're going to actually initialize this variable to a value, to something, because right now it is nothing. And we're going to layer some things on top of that window. And this is going to help us address the issue of when we build and run our application. In the simulator, we see the app launch, we see our interstitial, and then we see nothing. We see this black void here. So I just stopped the app from running on the simulator by hitting Command period for those of you that are interested in a nice keyboard shortcut. Similarly, if you want to run the application, you can head up to Product, Run, or you can do Command R. Similarly, Build is Command B. For those of you who don't know, quick review, build is essentially compiling our app, Command B. And if all is good, if your code looks good and there are no errors, you'll see a little build succeeded thing here. If there was an error, let's say we had a missing brace like that, Xcode might flag it in advance by showing these little warnings here. But you could also hit Command B and it would pick up the error for you and say, build failed. There's something wrong. There's one error. And you can inspect that list of errors by clicking on the fourth tab in here. And it'll say Swift compiler error expected declaration. Not a great hint at what specifically is wrong, but we as developers, we know that people aren't going to necessarily do things for us. Xcode can only go so far, so sometimes we got to do a little digging around and try and diagnose the problem ourselves. So it's a missing brace. We hit Command Build again, and it succeeds. Running or hitting this play button, similarly product run, that builds, but then it also executes our code. So it builds, compiles to make sure everything is kosher, and then it executes it, which means that it basically installs it and launches it in the simulator. Anyway, back to our window. Let's give ourselves some room here inside of application did finish launching with options, and let's bring a value to this window. And if we option click on window, we'll see what a window is. It's a class that defines an object known as a window that manages and coordinates the views an app displays on a device screen. So unless an app can display content on an external device screen, an app only has one window. This isn't entirely true. There are other reasons when you might create second, third, or more windows, but most applications end up with just one single window. Also worth noting, if we fire up Safari and we Google, or in this case, Google search UIWindow, usually the top result, whenever we Google a class name of a class in the Apple frameworks, the top Google search result will be the Apple documentation or the class reference for that class. So if we click that, we will be taken straight to developer.apple.com to this document that looks like this. And this is a document that provides anything you would ever want to know about UIWindow. Description up top, and then information on its properties and methods that you can call below. Tons of supplementary info as well. So just worth noting that in addition to this option click here, that is available to you as a really robust documentation resource. So let's write some code. Let's create a new window. So we're going to say self.window equals UIWindow, open parentheses, and frame. We're going to specify a frame. And we're going to basically pass in the bounds or the frame of the screen of the device because we want our window to completely fill the screen of the device when our app launches. So this is basically saying this window variable is equal to a new instance of UIWindow that is sized according to the device bounds. And UI screen, main screen, it is what it sounds like. If we option click here, it returns the screen object representing the device's screen. Pretty cool. So let's also say we want something to look at. Whoops, that's not the guy we want. We want to give this guy something recognizable so that when the app launches, we can actually see it. We can see that our window is on screen. Throat's getting a little sore. So let's write self.window.background color equals UIColor.magenta color. And as we go forward, it's worth noting we're going to use a lot of different classes that are part of the Apple frameworks. UI color, UI screen, UI window, properties on these classes like background color. And I might not always pause to describe what every single one of these things is, but you can always pause yourself and option click on any one to get a solid description about what this thing is. Next, we're going to write one more line of code, which is self.window.makeKeyAndVisible. So 3 lines of code. We've written them at our override point. The first one initializes our window property. The second one makes it magenta colored or pink. And the third one says, this is the key window. We're going to roll with this and we want you to make it visible. And as long as we do these things in this method before we return, we're going to have something to view on screen. So let's run the app now. Hit the play button or do Command R and watch it launch in the simulator. And there you go. We no longer have a black void. We have a wonderful magenta screen. And if we do hardware home, or if we do Command Shift H 2 times, we can expose the multitask zone, and we see that our application now looks like the Hello World app in that it's got a UI, albeit simple. So we'll see the status bar up here, our pink window, and that's it. But we also notice that when we run this application, this little debug panel popped up. We looked at this a little in the Hello World app module, but this is a panel that gives us information about what is happening when our app is running. And this puts up a little warning here. It says application windows are expected to have a root view controller at the end of application launch. So what does this mean? This means that we're not totally done creating and customizing or initializing our window object. It's expecting our window to be associated with a view controller. So you'll notice before we deleted our storyboard in that viewController.swift class, and this is saying, hey, I think there's something missing. Like, we'll let you run this app, but we're pretty sure you need to do something else, that you haven't provided a root view controller which a window is expecting. So we will do that next. However, worth noting, some of you may be saying, what is this question mark? And in the module on Swift where we talk about optionals, we get into what this question mark is. But as a matter of review, this basically means that in the declaration of this variable window of type UI window with a question mark here, the question mark means that this is an optional. And this means that this variable is allowed to be something or nothing, which means that we can initialize it to a window, but we could also say self.window equals nil. We can set it back to nothing. We could then set it back to something again. The point being that anytime you have an optional variable, you're going to need to, when you reference it later on, do some things to handle the fact that it is an optional. And in our case, for these 2 lines of code, it means being a little redundant here and using the question mark whenever you reference this variable, which basically says, please, to the compiler, attempt to execute this line of code. But if self.window is nothing, if it is nil, do not continue executing this line of code. Do not execute anything after the fact, which means that if it is nil, it will sort of fail gracefully and move on to the next line of code. But we know for a fact that we initialized to something here. This isn't really necessary, but syntactically, as diligent members of the Swift community who adhere to convention, we are going to use the question mark here. In fact, the compiler will tell us that something is wrong if we are not using the question mark. We can see that little arrow there. It's telling us that optional is not unwrapped. Did we mean to use the exclamation point or the question mark? Anyway, moving on, what we're going to do next is address this error that shows up at the bottom of our screen.